thank you all for coming out. We know it's a beautiful Saturday afternoon. Our author appreciates, so does Book Passage as always. Thanks for supporting independent bookstores like this one. I have a couple of housekeeping things to do, during which if you could check your cell phones, make sure they're on silent or turned off. Everyone around you appreciate that. A lot of people who are here either themselves have some kind of chronic pain issues or know someone who does. I certainly do, so I'm very interested in this presentation today. Larry Berkelhammer had 19 years in private practice as a practicing psychotherapist, and also had his own issues, as he will tell you about, which led to the research that led to this book, In Your Own Hands. And he also has a blog at larryberkelhammer.com. He's contributed to Om Times, Psych Central, and many other blogs in the chronic illness community. And he's our neighbor from San Rafael. So would you please welcome Larry Berkelhammer.
Thank you. I don't have a big voice, so let me know. Can you hear me okay in the back? Okay, you can all hear. Okay, this is my agenda. I'm going to start off telling you about my work in mind-body medicine. Then I'll tell you my personal story and a very unusual personal experience that happened to me that motivated me to do the research that ended up becoming my book and the course I teach at College of Marin. And then I'll be telling you about the results of the research, especially the power of belief and certain behaviors and attributes and attitudes that correlate with better health and well-being. When I was in, so I'm retired, but right now I just teach a class at College of Marin and I blog. But when I was working with clients, all my clients had severe debilitating medical conditions, chronic medical conditions. And so what I did is I tried to work with them. I would teach through biofeedback, self-hypnosis, imagery, cognitive restructuring. I would try to teach them to improve their state of mind with the goal of improving their state of health, because if you can improve your state of mind, you can improve your state of health. So primarily I worked with them to identify what mattered to them most in life, and then to teach them how to pursue those values. In the late 90s, I was in private practice working with people with chronic medical conditions, and although I had always had some chronic illness myself, getting sick a lot, having severe arthritis, I had never been to an academic medical center. So in the late 90s I found my way to UCSF, and they started slapping all these fancy name diagnoses on me, and I got scared seeing these names. But at the same time I thought, well, okay, this is validating. Now I have names for what I have, and now they can fix me, they can cure me. But as soon as I got the diagnoses, I realized there are no cures. Medicine is still really in its infancy. There are cures for acute illnesses, but not for chronic illnesses. So I was already eating a good diet. I was already doing the best I could with exercise, getting enough sleep, stress management. I figured, well, what more can I do? What more is there? And the what more is working with the mind. And so that's what I ended up looking into in an even bigger way. I had an interesting experience one night in January 1991. I was at home and I started really fast onset of severe chills, fever, body aches, fatigue. It was the peak of the flu season, and even though I had had a flu shot, one of my diagnoses is I have a primary immunodeficiency disease. Well, one of the problems with that is you can't always mount a good immune response to the vaccines you get. So I came down with the flu. However, it only lasted 2 hours, which is unheard of. So at 8 o'clock, I had planned I was going to be watching this karate tournament. And having been in the martial arts, I really got into it. And for the next 2 hours, I was watching this tournament on TV and actually believed that I was in the ring fighting that night. And my body became so energized that when it ended at 10 o'clock, I realized I was all better. Now, as happy as I was to be all better, I very soon became very frustrated, because the next time I got sick, I tried to do the same thing again, and it didn't work. And I kept trying it, and it was never working. So eventually I came to realize that trying doesn't work. You have to know. And that night, when I was watching the karate tournament, I became someone else. I became a healthy person in my mind. I was a karate fighter. So thinking of myself as a sick person trying to get well, that just doesn't seem to be good enough. It doesn't work. So I became very curious. What are the limits of the power of the mind to affect physiologic change and to cure disease? But I really wanted to know the science. So I went to the medical journals. And so I researched, in particular, the fields of psychophysiology, which is the field that deals with the effect of mind on physiologic functioning, the field of psycho-oncology, which is the field of applying psychology to cancer, and the field of psychoneuroimmunology, which is about the mind-body interface, in particular the immune system, the effect of the mind on the immune system. I also studied positive psychology. That's me climbing up all the studies that I looked at. The results of my literature review were that I discovered that there are certain personality traits and certain behaviors that actually seem to more strongly correlate with improved health and happiness. I like this quote by Frank Lloyd Wright: "The thing always happens that you really believe in, and the belief in a thing makes it happen." The problem is, we have a lot of beliefs that are unhealthy beliefs, self-defeating beliefs, beliefs that we can't succeed at something, or beliefs that we're going to get sick and die, or we're just going to keep going downhill and get worse and worse. All kinds of negative beliefs of all types. And people have worked for years to try to get rid of those beliefs. It doesn't work as well as stepping back and gaining distance from the beliefs. We all have self-limiting beliefs that hold us back. This was a mentor of mine, Dr. Jean Ochterberg. Basically what she's saying is that every thought we have affects every cell in the body. So be careful what you think. So I'm going to tell you about some case studies. This was a case study done. Medical students are subjects of all kinds of experiments. In a pharmacology class in a medical school, the professor gave half the students in the class sedatives, and half the students in the class were given stimulants. The students who were given the stimulants had all the normal reactions you would expect from a stimulant, and the students who were given the sedative became very lethargic. But what the students didn't know is they were all, 100% of them were given placebos. So this is the power of the mind. These are medical students. These are people who are really into science. And they fell for this. They totally believed they were being given the real thing, and their bodies believed it. So this is the power of the mind. William Osler was one of the first, well, father of modern medicine. He invented the residency program. Prior to William Osler, medical students used to go to medical school and then go out and practice. He put in the first residency program at Johns Hopkins when they opened in the 1880s. And he's the one who really started teaching doctors that the mind of the patient is more important than the disease. This was a study done in Japan. It was published in the Kyushu Journal of Medical Science in 1962. Now, a lot of these studies are old because we have what are called, do you know about IRBs, internal review boards? You can't do most of what was done 50 years ago. You just can't do it anymore. Fortunately, these studies were published. So in this case, they took a bunch of teenage boys who were all known to be allergic to poison ivy. In the first part of the study, they rubbed a harmless leaf on their forearms, told them it was poison ivy, and they broke out with the rash. In the second half of the study, They told them they're rubbing a harmless leaf on their arms, but they were actually rubbing poison ivy on their arms. But their minds told them it's harmless, and they were okay. William James, no clear dividing line between a person's philosophy and physiology. When Deepak Chopra was a young medical resident in Massachusetts, training as an endocrinologist, he had a patient who came to him, had all the signs and symptoms of gallstones. This was before ultrasound, MRI, CT scans. They had to do open abdominal exploratory surgery to figure out what was wrong. And when the surgeon got in, he found it wasn't gallstones. She had widely metastasized cancer throughout her abdominal cavity, and it had metastasized to the liver, which is a very bad thing. The patient's daughter pleaded with Deepak Chopra, please don't tell my mother that she has cancer, it'll kill her. In those days, actually, doctors, it wasn't hard to convince a doctor not to tell the patient because doctors knew it could kill the patient. So he complied. He didn't tell the patient that she had cancer. 8 months later, the patient comes back for a checkup. She was supposed to be dead by now. Her cancer's gone. She comes back 2 years later for another follow-up. And she says, doctor, I was so sure I had cancer 2 years ago that when it turned out to be just gallstones, I told myself I would never be sick another day in my life. And the cancer never returned. So this is the power of the mind. Norman Cousins, he had recovered from a heart attack early on, but then developed a fatal form of ankylosing spondylitis. And it's well known that he, as it's written in his book, Anatomy of an Illness, that he supposedly laughed himself to health. Well, it's documented that he did recover, and it's documented that he spent every day watching comedy movies or old candid camera shows, episodes, and it's believed that a lot of his recovery was due to his state of mind. He was spending every day laughing. This is a case of cardiologist Dr. Bernard Lound, who had a patient who had had a massive heart attack that irreparably destroyed his heart. This is in the days before heart transplants. He was expected to die within a couple of days. But the patient overheard the doctor telling a medical student in his room that he had a wholesome gallop. The patient had a wholesome gallop. Now, any of you know what that means? Okay, no cardiologists here. A wholesome gallop is a very severe cardiac dysrhythmia. You don't want to have a wholesome gallop. Yeah. But this patient doesn't know that. This is what comes to mind for him. He's as healthy as a horse. So he began to believe he's really as healthy as a horse. So he was supposed to be dead in a couple of days, leaves the hospital, comes back for a follow-up. Doctor, I knew I would be fine when I overheard you telling those medical students that my heart had a wholesome gallop. So again, this is the power of the mind. These are all cases that have been written up in medical journals. This is another mentor of mine, Dr. Lawrence Lashan, who wrote the book Cancer as a Turning Point. Feelings affect body chemistry, which affects the development or regression of a tumor, just as body chemistry affects feelings. So what we think affects our physiology, and our physiology affects what we think. Both things are true. There was a survey done of oncologists, and about 100 oncologists responded. They were asked, what single attribute of your cancer patients do you think is most strongly associated with recovery from cancer? And 90% of those oncologists all reported the same thing: hope. Hope instills, it somehow boosts the immune system, and the immune system is then able to fight off the cancer. So this is a case study where This woman had intractable asthma. Her doctor had tried every medication on the market. She was at a point where she could have died of her asthma at any time. It was that bad. But the physician was approached by a pharmaceutical company who had a new experimental drug. He gives the patient the drug, and she recovers. I mean, she's fine. But she recovered so well that the doctor had some doubts. No drug could be this powerful. So he played a trick on her. He needed to learn for himself, is this really the drug? So he gave her a placebo, because he wanted to prove that it's got to be the placebo effect. She comes back in, she says the medicine didn't work this time. When he had given her the drug from the pharmaceutical company, it worked. But when he gave her his own placebo, it didn't work. So then he realized, that convinced him, okay, it really was, this miracle drug from the pharmaceutical company apparently really is a miracle drug. So he gives her that drug, and then he needs more of it. So he calls the pharmaceutical company to order more of the drug. And this is what the drug company tells him.
Oh my goodness.
So she'd been given a placebo all along. The question I have for you is, why did she get better on the placebo from the pharmaceutical company and didn't get better on the placebo that the doctor made up? Yeah.
Because the doctor believed it the first time, and he conveyed his confidence to her.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. When the doctor first gave the patient the drug, the doctor was filled with hope about this drug and a lot of excitement. And the patient picked that up non-verbally. But when he made up his own placebo, he knew it's a placebo, and he had some doubts, and she picked that up too. 95% of what we communicate is nonverbal. The next thing I want to talk about is social connections. In all the literature reviews that I did, I uncovered all those behaviors and attributes that I showed you in that list in the beginning, but the single one for which there is the most evidence for efficacy is social support. And I'll be getting into this more. People who live the most isolated lives develop chronic illness at an earlier age, and they die young. And they don't live happy lives. So in this study published in the journal Cancer, 244 breast cancer patients were asked how many people they confided in after their breast cancer surgery. The people who confided in 2 or more people, in more than 2 people, at the end of 7 years, 76% of those people were still alive. Of the people who hadn't confided in anyone, only 56% were still alive. In this study, which went out for 30 years and was followed by 4 different teams, published in major medical journals, 1,300 medical students at Johns Hopkins were given psych evaluations to determine their ability to form deep relationships with people. 30 years later, the researchers followed up and found that those who had the least ability, who 30 years earlier in their evaluations had been found to have the least ability to form lasting, strong relationships, interpersonal relationships, had 16 times the cancer rate as, the ones who had the least ability had 16 times the cancer rate. That's pretty profound. Friendlier people have better immune function. This came across in all the studies. People who are open and friendly to strangers, who are just warm-hearted, they're happier people and they are healthier people. They're known as affiliator types. In this study, 3,000 breast cancer patients, all of whom were nurses, were studied, and those without close friends had a mortality rate of 4 times that of women with a close circle of friends. So the nurses with close friends had 1/4 the mortality rate. This is a very well-known epidemiologic study because of its size. 7,000 Alameda County residents were followed for 9 years, controlled for all the usual variables, potential confounding variables. Again, they found the lowest mortality and in other words, longevity correlated directly with social connections. After the 7 years, they did another follow-up, going out for another 8 years. So in total, they followed these people for 17 years. At the end of the 17 years, they still had the records available of 6,848 of the initial 7,000. And again, they found the same result. Looking at all the variables, all the different factors, the social support was the most important thing. A similar study in Tecumseh, Michigan, almost 3,000 people controlling for all the variables. Again, those with the least social support had 4 times the mortality rate of those with the most. I created a class at College of Marin, and so first I wrote the book that's all about the research, and then I, this last January, started teaching a class at College of Marin where I actually teach exercises in the class that help people actually learn these things. For social support, I've actually created, the class now is a community. We sit in a closed circle, and it's a community. And my hope is that people in the class will improve well-being and health based on that. One of the things we do in the class is something called self-empowerment walking. It's a mindfulness exercise. And the mindfulness helps us to develop a state of relaxed alertness. When I was working with clients, I was teaching them, I was using biofeedback, self-hypnosis, a whole bunch of things. But I found that they weren't practicing. Most of them didn't practice. And I'm not very good at practicing things either. And I eventually discovered that people don't practice unless they have self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is the belief that you can succeed in a specific task. If you truly believe you can succeed in something, you are far more likely to succeed. So these are catalysts for not just health and well-being, but for success in any endeavor. It's great to have self-empowerment and self-efficacy, but how do you develop it? So the first step is to identify your personal values. These are just some examples of values. A value is often, values and goals are often confused. A value is a way to live, how you want to live your life. A goal is something you want to achieve. So these are examples of values. So the first step in self-empowerment and self-efficacy is identifying what are your personal values. And decision-making becomes a lot easier in life when you are very clear about what your values are. So you want to identify your personal values and goals. You want to really look at yourself and see, are my behaviors in harmony with what I value? And you want to choose new behaviors that are more aligned with your personal values and goals. You want to consciously choose not to engage in the behaviors that are not aligned with what you value. I'm not going to go into this too much, but basically this is about, essentially, if you want to improve behavior and performance, you first have to develop self-efficacy, and those are the 4 components that go into self-efficacy. Mastery is the first one. That comes from taking on a challenge, meeting the challenge, and mastering it, and then from mastering some challenge, you develop self-efficacy. Another way is vicarious experience. You see someone else mastering a challenge, and you can vicariously develop self-efficacy. Verbal persuasion, that would be like having a good coach, could be a life coach. I'll skip the last one. People go to great lengths to find meaning and purpose is another big one. Why do people do crazy things? I mean, this isn't a photograph that was tilted on its side. She's climbing upside down. People do rock climbing in the most dangerous places. They climb Himalayas, they skydive. Why? It's because we have a need to see what we're made of. We need to test ourselves. Meaning and purpose. Candy Lightner, anyone know who Candy Lightner is? Well, Candy Lightner, you've probably heard of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Candy Lightner's daughter was killed by a repeat drunk driver. So the way she dealt with her grief is she formed Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which has done really wonderful work. So being of service to others is a way of finding meaning and purpose. So our thoughts are important because our thoughts lead to action. Whatever our thoughts are, that's going to determine our behavior. So our thoughts lead to actions. Repeating the action forms a habit. Once we have those habits, that forms our character, who we are, and that determines where we're going to go in life, what we're going to accomplish. John Wooden was the famous basketball coach of the UCLA basketball team, and he said, failure is not fatal, but failure to change might be. Once we see what our values are, we owe it to ourselves to pursue our dreams. Nelson Mandela, no passion to be found playing small in settling for a life less than the one you are capable of living. So it's important to look in the mirror, to really look at ourselves, look inside, and to be yourself. And you don't start off climbing a mountain. You just start off putting one foot in front of the other. So this one wise bumblebee is coaching the other one. Stand. Just pick one flower and start from there. So we want to just pick what it is that we want to do and just start small, put one foot in front of the other, and just start working towards our goals and working in harmony with our values. This is something that has a lot to do with empowerment. It's a pretty provocative statement, so I want to ask all of you, please, don't ever do anything that you don't want to do. Now, usually when I say that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to people. Do you think it's possible to never do anything you don't want to have to do? I mean, do you think there are some things that you absolutely have to do?
Breathe.
Well, breathing would happen automatically. You don't have to do anything to make breathing happen. But for example, one thing people sometimes say is, well, I have to pay my taxes. To which I say, no, you do not. You'll pay the consequences if you don't, but it's your choice. There are other things, you know, I have to stop at a red light. No, you don't. People go through red lights all the time. They pay the consequences. Other people pay the consequences. The point is, if you want to live with real self-empowerment, then you want to do things only out of choice. So think of the most unpleasant thing you do on a regular basis. And if you imagine something you do on a regular basis that you really detest, I'm guessing you're going to be telling yourself, I have to do it. And I'm here to say, don't do it under those circumstances. Find what it is about that activity. Why are you doing it? And you will conclude that you're choosing to do it because you want the result. So this is a man in Joe's Diner sitting at the lunch counter reading his menu. You know, most of us, I hired an artist. I can't draw, so I hired an artist to draw this for me because I'm trying to make this point that most of us, if we have to go in for an invasive medical procedure, we think, oh, I have to do this. I dread it. I have to do it. Well, the dread, that part's unavoidable. But it's really important to look at, okay, why would I want to do it? Well, I want to do it because my doctor is recommending it because my health depends on it. So therefore, I'm actually choosing to do it. So when we use language like have to, that's disempowering. If you want to be self-empowered, you want to choose everything you do. It's very empowering to make conscious choices every day. William James, compared to what we ought to be, we are only half awake, and we awaken to our potential by drawing upon heretofore untapped inner resources. So it's important to look inside and find our resources. John Wooden again. He had a player on the team who was complaining a lot at a certain point, and one of the most famous players. And this is what John Wooden said to the player: things turn out best for the people who make the best of the way things turn out. It's very disempowering to complain, because when we complain, we're weak. When we recognize, okay, there's something I don't like here, but I'm going to choose to do it anyway because it lines up with my values, that's empowering. Is anyone here, any marine biologists here? Okay, then probably none of you know how a lobster grows. The way a lobster grows is it molts. A lobster has an exoskeleton. That exoskeleton doesn't grow. For the lobster to grow, it has to shed its shell. Now, when it sheds its shell, it's totally vulnerable. It's completely vulnerable to being eaten. And that's what growth is like for us too. It's uncomfortable. You can't fall if you don't climb, but there's no joy in living your whole life on the ground. It's a quote by John Shedd. I love this quote. A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. Ships are built to sail the world. Whether they are in warships and they're going into battle, or they're cruise ships going into beautiful places, they're built to sail the world. They're not built to stay safe in a harbor. Many things aren't equal, but everyone gets the same 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We make time for what we truly want. Again, that's why it's so important to identify what are our personal values, what matters most to me in life. I don't know whose quote this is, but I really love it. Because this is all about self-efficacy and self-empowerment. I can is 100 times more important than IQ. And this has been proven so many times. So, now this could be a little dangerous, but I mean, obviously if you see yourself as a lion, you might behave in ways that might not be wise, but how we see ourselves is important. And it's really important to be okay with being uncomfortable. And it's important to take risks. Now, again, you don't want to, if you've never surfed and you decide you'd like to learn to surf, you don't go rent a surfboard, go down to Mavericks and surf one of these killer waves. You just put one step in front of the other. A mind that is stretched by new experience can never go back to its old dimensions. We do reach plateaus. So if you're working in personal growth, if you're working to develop your self-empowerment and self-esteem, to improve your well-being, your health, and live a richer life, you'll keep growing, and then you'll reach a long plateau, and then you'll start growing again. You know, those of us who grew up watching the old John Wayne war movies, you know, all these actors were completely fearless. Well, that doesn't line up with reality. If you talk to returning veterans, they will tell you none of them were fearless. Almost none of them were fearless. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the judgment that something else is more important than the fear. So in other words, have your fear. Feel the fear. Let the fear be there, but take action anyway that's in harmony with what you most value. And I want to end with a video.
Dismissed from drama school with a note that read, "Wasting her time. She's too shy to put her best foot forward." Turned down by the Decca Recording Company, who said, "We don't like their sound, and guitar music is on the way out." A failed soldier, farmer, and real estate agent. At 38 years old, he went to work for his father as a handyman. Cut from the high school basketball team, he went home, locked himself in his room, and cried. A teacher told him he was too stupid to learn anything, and he should go into a field where he might succeed by virtue of his pleasant personality. Fired from a newspaper because he lacked imagination and had no original ideas. His fiancée died, he failed in business twice, he had a nervous breakdown, and he was defeated in 8 elections. If you've never failed, you've never lived.
When I
come from? Can you share where that came from? Can we Google that or something?
I just found that on the internet. I don't remember what search term I used, but I went to YouTube and I probably put in
Perseverance or something?
something like that, or motivation or something. When I wrote my book, I hadn't actually started. The book is all about the results of my research, my literature reviews, but I hadn't really started yet talking about self-empowerment and self-efficacy. I devoted 3 chapters in the book to mindfulness, because at the time I felt that was the most important. And I devoted a lot in the book to social support. I've got a lot in there about that, a lot about meaning and purpose. But since then, I've really, in my course at College of Marin, started designing, I've designed the whole course around developing self-empowerment and self-efficacy, because I came to realize that if we want to improve well-being, we really need self-empowerment and self-efficacy. So,
teaching that course this September?
Yeah, so it starts again. It's a 7-week course in community education at the College of Marin, and it starts again Wednesday, September 2nd is the next one.
What's the name of it?
The name of the course is In Your Own Hands, A Course in Self-Empowerment.
Is it daytime or evening?
It's on Wednesdays from 1:10 in the afternoon to 2:30. So it's only 80 minutes long, once a week for 7 weeks. I'm pretty excited about the course because I've created the very thing. Before, I used to just teach the facts. And kind of today, I've been just talking about the facts. In the course, I'm not doing this. You won't get facts in my College of Marin course. You get an experience. So, I'm open for any questions at all. Yeah.
You had a slide up on self-efficacy that you got off of it just a little too quick, and it had, I think, 5 or 6
I know which one you mean.
or points to it.
Oh,
Yeah,
wait a
you
minute.
just, there you go.
That one?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is how we develop self-efficacy. You have to take risks and try new things. And when you try new things, even if you fail, you know, the most successful people in life are the ones who failed the most. Mm-hmm. If you ask any of the great entrepreneurs, they've failed in lots of businesses. Scientists, researchers, they fail all the time, and they are the most successful people, because if you don't take the risk, you don't succeed. So that's the first one, an active mastery. The second one, why do we love watching movies or reading books about very famously successful people? Because it inspires us, and we see what they've done, and that helps us to do it. So that's the vicarious experience, self-modeling. Verbal persuasion. We all need this kind of support, or we can all certainly benefit by it. Some type of coach or support team.
Someone who believes in you.
Yeah, someone who believes in you, yes. Someone who keeps cheering you on. I mean, this is why sport teams have cheerleaders. We all need to be cheered on. You know, someone who's in our corner yelling, cheering for us. So that's the verbal persuasion. Life coaches do this kind of work. All kinds of coaches, sports coaches. Physiological arousal, we can learn a lot by tuning in, by going inside and tuning in to our thoughts, our feelings, emotions, our sensations. That's how we really learn who we are.
There was some things related to self-efficacy that had to do with values and goals, and how when you know your values and goals, then you can play at your highest game. And I've been having a conversation with my girlfriend recently, because my assertion is that some of the values and goals by which we are judged, or have to do with like universal morals and values, that is usually a can of worms, especially if somebody thinks they know exactly what those are, and you know what I mean? So,
I know, yes. This is a big, I think this is a big problem, and I think this is, I'm getting beyond, outside my level of expertise, but I have some strong feelings on this, that I think a lot of the violence in the world is from people perpetrating their values onto other people. So what I'm advocating is finding your own personal values and living by your own personal values, and not trying to convince other people to adopt your values. Yeah.
What did you say about hope in the immune system?
It seems that hope is a stimulant to the immune system. It actually ramps up the immune system. When we're depressed, which basically is a lack of hope, the immune system gets suppressed. So the ideal would be to engage in optimistic thinking all the time, but good luck with that one. Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on her point, because when you were going through the slides, there was a why screaming out at me. You mentioned that every thought has an effect biochemically in your system.
Right.
And 90% of the oncologists said the most important element of all their patients was hope.
Yeah.
So if I were Oliver Sacks, who's got an incredibly curious mind, or if I were the CEO of a major drug company, I'd want to find out, so what's the magic that happens biochemically in a body with all these hopeful people that have such a success rate against cancer?
Right.
I mean,
well,
hasn't some study been born of that?
It is understood, but of course the pharmaceutical industry can't produce a drug that gives people that. I mean, they've tried with antidepressants. Our antidepressants are still quite primitive. The whole idea of again, I'm getting out of my area of expertise, but I have some strong feelings about it. Anything anti is not ideal. I don't think the pharmaceutical industry will ever be providing us with these answers. These answers are going to come from psychology. Of course, I'm a little biased because that's my field, but I think if you want to improve the state of mind, you have to work with the mind. Taking a pill is going to have limited value. Yeah.
You said that you've, been dealing with some of your own health issues, and so are those issues still ongoing with you? And if so, how have you used these things, and what effect has that had for you?
I truly believe that I would no longer be alive if I hadn't started living according to what I'm advocating. I was not doing well, and I didn't have a good attitude. And when I started reading the literature in psychoneuroimmunology, I started realizing that here I am in psychology, and I'm not, this is very common. I mean, there are a lot of psychologists out there who are not the happiest people in the world. I mean, that's, happy-go-lucky people don't go into the field of psychology. You go into the field because you're hoping to learn something that might help yourself. And so I finally started taking some of my own medicine and really working hard to take risks and go inside. And for me, the biggest risks were the path for me to improved health was to allow myself to feel all the icky feelings that I had always, all my life, tried to suppress. And working so hard to suppress shame was destroying my life. It was destroying my health. So I'm still working at it. I mean, I'll always be working at it because I think that's what else is life for. I was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation somewhere in '99 or 2000. And they tried to chemoconvert me, didn't work. They electrocardioconverted converted me, and that normalized my heart rhythm to normal sinus rhythm. Then I was still having a lot of weird stuff going on, and I could feel it. And I learned that I could do something about it. And I also learned that I was very resistant to doing anything about it. It was just like, I just want to go about my day. I don't want to have to take the time. But But I realized that when I took the time to breathe, when I say breathe, I mean to allow myself to just be fully present with my breathing, with the physical sensations of breathing, and allowed myself to breathe diaphragmatically, abdominal breathing, and to slow my breathing down intentionally. And a psychophysiological technique I recommend that I do is to make the exhalation twice as long as the inhalation. So just doing that one breathing technique has allowed me to self-convert to normal sinus rhythm when my rhythm is out of whack. Headache, backache, bellyache, I've worked with them all myself through just taking the time to go inward, be fully present with myself, to look at, oh, what kind of thoughts are in my head right now? And I often recognize that, gee, I'm having some unhealthy thinking, thinking like I don't deserve something, or I don't measure up with something, or I should be ashamed. These are terrible thoughts. These are terribly destructive ways of thinking, and we all engage in them, and you can't push them out. They get stronger. All you can do is welcome them and be with them. Yeah. So
maybe one more.
Yeah.
So I was brought up Christian Scientist, which has a whole lot to do with mind and health and the body. And I stumbled across a woman named Louise Hay, like 25 years ago, who wrote You Can Heal Your Life,
Right.
and has all of these affirmations and things like that just sound really goofy, but it seems like they work. I've had her daily calendar for like 6 years or more, and they're really cool. Have you run into her and talked to people about?
Oh yeah, she's very well known. There are a lot of people out there who have found all different kinds of things that sound really goofy, but they work for some people. The problem is, a lot of them, they write a book on it, and then it turns out it doesn't work for most people, but it did work for them. They're not just trying to sell a book. It actually worked for them. My book is based on a literature review of all the statistics of the studies. I think if you have strong enough beliefs that something is going to work, now your beliefs may be different from my beliefs, but if you have a strong enough belief that you are going to get well, that you are capable of getting well, and you really know inside you can get well, it is possible, you are far more likely to get well. So belief system, the problem I have is when people inflict their belief systems on other people. But
I'm not a Christian Scientist anymore.
Okay.
However,
yeah.
the foundation was there.
Yeah.
So when I ran into her use of it, her mother and her grandmother were also Christian Scientists, and she used it in all kinds of other cases, and has her own publishing company, and things like that. I mean, world renowned.
Yeah. So, okay.
Time to get to some signing.
Yeah. So I will be right here. Thank you.